Hey, Beau! How do we know our thoughts are our own when we're so easily manipulated?
This is actually a really fundamental question. So thank you for asking it. And I thought I'd do it as a fireside chat. Maybe I'll do this more often. And I've got little monkey here, there, and I've got little Shambo behind me. And so, how do we know that our ideas are our own? In fact, how do we know who we are? Um, well, when it comes to perception, um, it's actually a really difficult answer. Um, and because everything that's driving your perception are your assumptions and your biases. And these assumptions and biases are usually learned. They're almost always learned, right? But they're and or inherited. So many of the ways, the reflexes that you generate in the world aren't your own. In fact, almost none of them were your own. Uh, And they came from, for instance, when you were a child, of how your parents taught you how to be in the world. And their ways of being in the world came from their parents and or society and culture. Um, what's so essential when it comes to perception is to have awareness that this is happening, because it's only when you have awareness that you have the possibility of seeing differently. You don't have a choice until you know you have one. But that step, that process, is can be so difficult because it can require you, in fact, it almost always requires you to challenge what you assumed to be true before, especially about who you think you are, your own identity. And to step into an uncertainty of self is one of the greatest uncertainties you can experience. Uh, I'll give you an example. So here we have Monkey down there, right? I just showed you. I'll show you once more time because she's so lovely. Okay, so now just yesterday, Misha, one of my gremlins, and Theo and I were walking through the Christmas market of Bath. And we had both of the dogs, they're quite large dogs, on leads, and they're being very well behaved. And so many people would engage with them in a very loving way. I mean, they're beautiful dogs, and people say, "Oh, beautiful dogs." And I'd say, "Oh, you're welcome to pet them." And they would, the dog was snuggled into them. It was beautiful. But some people were very afraid, understandably, naturally afraid. Now, let's think about where that fear often comes from. So, if you're a child, so I'm going to use this as a literal example, but also a metaphor of where many of your perceptions and reflexes come from. And so let's imagine you happen to be raised by a parent who was afraid of dogs. Okay. Now you're 2 years old, a dog comes up to you, and the parent says, "Oh, mother or daughter, of mother or father or whomever, says, oh, be careful, dogs are dangerous." Okay. Now, at 2 years old, your parents are God. They know everything about the world. So, of course, you're going to trust them. Why wouldn't you? Okay. So you're going to, oh, okay, so you'll shy away. And they might even physically separate you. Now that happens again and again and again. And every time a dog comes to you, your parent tells you that it's dangerous. Okay. Now, that becomes now a learned behavior. Dogs are dangerous. It's Pavlovian in many senses, right? Now, notice that as a child, you've never actually experienced the dog being dangerous. You've just been told that they are. Uh, Now you're 24, 34, 44, and a dog comes up to you, and you now will reflexively respond towards that dog with a sense of danger. You will be looking for threat. And in fact, you will actually see threat in their eyes, see threat in their behavior, even if they're completely neutral. Okay, or even positive. You might even see that approach, that enthusiastic approach, as aggression. Okay, now this is all deeply now encoded in your brain. This is now a reflex, just like when the doctor hits your patellar tendon and your leg goes out. You see a dog, you see them approach, and now you get that reflexive response. It's become so ingrained with you that it's now a law of physics, right? That dogs are just dangerous. Now, think about this in all aspects of your life. What are the learned behaviors, those learned reflexes that have been instilled in you from your culture, your society, and your parents? Now, remember, your mother, your father, they might never have ever been attacked by a dog either, but because their parents, your grandparents, maybe one of them was, you've now inherited that grandparent's fear for a reason that maybe was justified for them, okay? But it's not justified for you. And we walk through life perceiving the world with these ideas, with these default assumptions, these learned behaviors. That could be a loving relationship. Men are dangerous, women are dangerous, being in love is dangerous, okay? It can also be just the opposite, keep in mind. It doesn't have to be negative, it can be positive. Your parents, your society, your culture could have instilled the idea of courage or compassion. And this is what we're trying to do with our education program, is to instill these other kinds of defaults that we become inevitable for that person. But fundamental of when can you know that these ideas are yours, someone else? They're never, in some sense, they're never just yours, right? All of these ideas are inside all of us. What gives you power, which gives you agency, is becoming aware of the fact that you have them. First of all, that self-awareness is fundamental, but it can also be scary and dangerous because it can actually challenge who you think you are. And so often we define ourselves so narrowly. We define ourselves in terms of instances rather than in terms of our fundamentals. Something I actually posted just the other day, the distinction between instances and fundamentals, which I'll build upon in another time. So once you become aware of that, and that's what we call perceptual intelligence in the lab of misfits, once you become perceptually intelligent, only then do you have the possibility of seeing differently, okay? And that's the irony. It's in becoming that awareness that can actually create tremendous fear, because now you're going to question what you thought to be true throughout your whole life. Only then do you have the possibility of creativity, of imagination, of freedom. So that step into uncertainty, which begins with a question, begins the process of taking agency in the ideas that become you. And those ideas aren't an instance, they are how you put them together, right? Think of music. You are a song. We're all composed of the same notes, okay? There are only so many notes on a keyboard. And think of the infinite and almost infinite number of pieces of music come from those notes. Who you are is a song. Who you are is poetry. It's how you put those notes together. It's how you put those words together. It's the why that underpins your life. Those fundamentals, not the instances. And you only have that possibility of defining yourself in terms of how you put it together when you become aware that many of the default assumptions that you have, those biases and assumptions, those ways of being, are learned behaviors. So that's my practice, my suggestion for you today and for the rest of your life, is think about what those learned behaviors are. Become self-aware, become perceptually intelligent as a first step, not as a final step. The next step is to take action, to do something about it. Because only in that action do you have the possibility of seeing differently in the future. And that's often grounded in those fundamentals of who you are, not in the instances. So thanks for asking and thanks for listening.